Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change and its ongoing progress, presence, reality. This is reality, unfortunately. Anything I say in these videos as far as prognostications about the future are based on science and evidence. And I have to add, as an addendum, I don't want it to happen. I'm not like, yeah, this is, I feel like for some people, the doomosphere or doom scene is something that people are like into because there's like some kind of rush about telling people that it's all going to be over soon, or we're headed for the falls, or we're headed for a cliff, or whatever. Trust me, I don't wish this to be true. I really, really don't. And spend a good part of my day kind of thinking, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? I'm just reporting on the facts as they stand, and the fact that we are not. We're taking very, very minimal action in the face of this news, as opposed to or to oppose the onslaught that industrial civilization is having on our ecosphere. So anyways, I'm just going to get into some articles. This is from Truthout, Darjamel, who's been extremely prolific lately. He's just cranking out these articles, a few a week, I believe, right now. I remember about a year or two ago when it seems like his articles were maybe every couple of weeks, and now they just seem to be coming fast and furious. This is entitled "Area of Global Dead Zones Doubling Every 10 Years." A diver observes filamentous algae, locally known as Thanatos, at La Ciotat in the Mediterranean Sea. Filamentous algae. On July 4th, 2015, recent global, this article actually is from, gosh, I wish Truthout would stop this. We're doing a little ad campaign. If you can contribute to Truthout, please do so. This is a great news source. I really, for the most part, on a 90 percentile scale, enjoy the news that they have. June 25th, 2018. Recent global warming has caused a major algal bloom on the seabed, suffocating flora and causing important biodiversity changes. The number and size of oceanic dead zones is increasing. The name says it all. But dead zones are areas along the seafloor where oxygen levels are so low they no longer can sustain marine life. Hypoxia, which is a deficiency in the amount of oxygen reaching the tissues of organisms, is a widespread and growing problem in Earth's oceans as industrial waste, fertilizer runoff from industrial agriculture, and anthropogenic climate disruption increasingly aggravate the crisis. An international team of scientists, sponsored in part by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, has published one of the broadest studies to date about declining oxygen in the world's oceans. One of the co-authors of the study is Nancy Rabelais, professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences at Louisiana State University. Rabelais, who is also a distinguished research professor at LSU's Marine Consortium, told Truthout the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico has, over the 31 years it has been measured, averaged 5,806 square miles in size. It remains the second largest human-caused low oxygen area in global coastal waters, said Rabelais, who discovered the Gulf dead zone and has been tracking it ever since. In 2017, it was the largest ever measured, 8,776 square miles. Her and her colleagues' research has also shown that there are now more than 400 coastal low oxygen areas around the globe, and the number of dead zones started to double roughly every decade beginning in the 1960s. A growing problem. Don Scavia, a professor emeritus of environment and sustainability at the University of Michigan, explained in detail what causes a dead zone. In the Gulf, as in most places where dead zones occur, the cause is excess nitrogen and or phosphorus inputs coupled with a physical process called stratification. Scavia, who was also NOAA's chief scientist of the National Ocean Service and has authored over 200 papers in refereed journals, told Truthout. The large nutrient inputs stimulate major blooms of algae that eventually settle into the deep waters. Furthermore, the decomposition of organic matter by bacteria uses oxygen, so physical stratification, which is caused by having warmer and or fresher water layers sit on top of colder and or saltier layers, prevents atmospheric oxygen from replenishing the supply. Hence, the concentration of oxygen decreases throughout the summer until winter storms mix the water again. This is why the excessive use of chemical fertilizers that contain phosphorus and nitrogen by the industrial agriculture sector are such a key factor in the creation of the massive dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. While pointing out that while there is a year-to-year variability in size since measurements began, Scavia, who has written at length about the negative impacts, added that retrospective modeling work has indicated that the size of the Gulf of Mexico dead zone roughly tripled between the early 1970s and the 1980s. The most recently published research on dead zones show that there are 5 to 6 very large dead zones. Matt Rota, the senior policy director at the environmental group Gulf Restoration Network in New Orleans, Louisiana, told Truthout he sees the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico being on an upward trajectory and agrees with Rabelais about the 2017 measurement being the largest it ever recorded. The prediction for the 2018 dead zone shows that it might not be as big this year, but is still forecasted to be almost 4 times the size of the Hypoxia Task Force's goal, which should have been reached in 2015, Rota told Truthout, referring to an EPA group monitoring the dead zone. Rota also pointed to nitrogen and phosphorus pollution as fueling the dead zone, but included sewage treatment plants, other industrial facilities, and animal feeding operations as well. The biggest contributor is the fertilizer that flows off the fields of corn and soybeans in the Midwest, he added. Jason Scorsese, chair of the International Environmental Policy Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, where he is also the director of the Center for the Blue Economy, sees dead zones as existing exclusively due to 2 factors: agricultural subsidies, in which industrial agriculture companies are incentivized to produce over-fertilization, which is the heart of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, Scorsese told Truthout. The second is the bias in the overall food culture toward animal products, which magnifies all of this, since so much is going to meat production. Scavia described how organisms unable to swim away from the dead zones, like worms and other animals that many fish feed on, will die. Fish that can swim will avoid the dead zone, but that often forces them into habitats that are less suitable for them, resulting in slower growth, Scavia said. Sometimes the fish, especially shrimp, are forced into more confined areas, making them more vulnerable to predators, including human fishing nets. Rabelais added that the ocean's ability to recover from dead zones can take time. Improvement in oxygen conditions following excess nutrient flux may take years to decades, she said. Rhoda pointed out how the commercial fishing industry in the Gulf of Mexico is impacted negatively by the dead zone. This has impacts on some of the key prey species in the Gulf, such as shrimp, crabs, and Atlantic croaker, he said, while adding that the only dead zone larger than that in the Gulf of Mexico is the one in the Baltic Sea. Scavia said we should be concerned that thousands of square miles of water on Earth have low oxygen levels. These regions are basically taken out of production. And if this amount of land was taken out of production, there would be significant concern, he explained. These dead zones also put some of our most important fisheries at risk. He said that while there has not been a clear demonstration of impact on the Gulf shrimp fisheries, for example, there are strong case histories showing that when you increase nutrient load to a system, fisheries increase to a certain point before they crash. It is hard to know when you are reaching that tipping point, Scavia said. So it is wise to avoid it. Rabelais agreed and added that there is a very real potential for fisheries that depend on healthy coastal waters, i.e. all fisheries, to collapse, with resultant economic losses to boot. Rhoda pointed out other impacts. Studies have shown a link between the Gulf dead zone and smaller shrimp sizes. He said, the dead zone can interrupt shrimp migration and force shrimpers to have to travel farther to make their catch, costing them more in fuel and ice, the two biggest expenses. These increases in fuel and ice cost also mean more energy is expended in both cases, further contributing to fossil fuel emissions. As for a solution, aside from the obvious need to work to mitigate climate disruption and a dramatic curtailment of the industrial agriculture's use of chemical fertilizers, Scavia pointed out that the dominant source of nutrients flowing into the Gulf come from the industrial row crop agriculture of the upper Midwest, the Corn Belt. While there has been a federal, state, tribal action plan in place since 2001 with the goal to reduce these loads and push the dead zone back to the size of the 1970s, very little reduction has taken place, Scavia explained. It has been difficult, both technically and politically, to reduce those loads from agriculture because the programs in place to do that are all voluntary and based on incentives, not regulation. Scorsese believes that since governments provide subsidies for industrial agriculture companies, governments providing subsidies for industrial agriculture companies are a global problem. There must be a global solution. Industrial agriculture subsidies and commodity crop subsidies should be abolished, he concluded. If you got rid of the subsidies, the world would move to a more of a plant-based food culture. Until real solutions are implemented, dead zones continue to spread. In 2003, 146 dead zones were recorded around the world by the UN's Global Environment Outlook Yearbook. By 2009, it more than doubled to 407. Indeed, this is a big problem. This is a big problem that I hear people talking about in the comment section, about how, you know, they lean towards a beef or meat eating culture is, creating a lot of problems around the world. Obviously, industrial agriculture creates a lot of problems around the world. It's a huge problem. But if we greatly reduced our meat intake and our meat output, this would take a lot of stress off of the agriculture productivity, the necessity for all the productivity that we have. A lot of our agriculture goes to feeding meat, keeping meat alive. Also, a lot of our corn goes to biofuels, which are not helpful, which actually add, I think, more emissions than actually just burning regular fuels, right? Because you have to grow these fuels. It takes, all this energy to grow the corn, and then you have to manufacture it into fuels, and then you burn the fuels. So just more and more of everything. And a few people have asked me to talk more about the meat industry. I myself am vegetarian. I'm not totally a vegan, although I have at times just been vegan. I don't eat. My major downfall is I eat cheese and eggs, and I know even the production of those foods require a vast amount of energy. But I do not eat the meat, and if one can at least go vegetarian, that would greatly reduce your footprint in the world. That would greatly reduce a lot of the problems. I know it's very, very hard. Like telling people to stop buying plastics and telling people to eat meat are it's probably two of the hardest things that you could ever, impress upon people. That both of those things are destroying the environment hand over fist, and it's just out of control. So if you can stop eating meat, that would be good. Do research on it. You can find out what to replace nutrients with. You can get plenty of protein from things that are not meat. You don't need meat. Nobody needs meat. So when somebody's like, I need my meat. No, you don't. You want your meat. You're accustomed to eating meat. And meat, should absolutely be a luxury and not an everyday thing. And I understand everybody's diets are different. And, some people, you change your diet up and you go all out of control. But, you can do things gradually. You can start with a little less every day, or, once a week. You can do many things to mitigate your intake of meat products. So I'm going to read this article. Our beef addiction has contributed to shocking new deforestation figures. I'd also like to add just an anecdote. I took my daughter to a couple of ballet recitals this weekend, and so they had all the functions had this free food thing going on, and every single thing had meat in it. There was literally, there's nothing for me to eat. At one function, there was bread and corn on the cob. And in the other function, it was bread and some salad. But, and literally every dish had to have meat in it. And I was just this is how the majority of Americans live. This is how they think. This is just normal to them. This is just what they do. Think about not eating meat. It's not going to cause your whole life to go upside down. And you would be helping out not just animals, but yourselves. Efforts to deal with the crisis are like trying to put out a house fire with a teaspoon. This is from June 27th, 2018, from the Huffington Post. Enough trees to fill 44 football fields were lost from tropical forests every minute of every day during 2017. I'm going to read that again. Enough trees to fill 44 football fields were lost from tropical forests every minute of every day during 2017, as the world racked up its second worst year for global tree cover loss, according to new data from the University of Maryland published by the World Resources Institute. The worst year was 2016, when a strong El Nino, a weather event that causes both droughts and floods, was in play. Even so, fire, chainsaws, and disaster erased about 37 million acres of tropical forest in 2017, an area larger than Bangladesh. The scale of the devastation left WRI experts scrambling for metaphors to convey the total inadequacy of the current conservation picture. We are trying to put out a house fire with a teaspoon, said Francis Seymour, a senior fellow at the Institute. Rainforests are a vital carbon sink, absorbing emissions created by human activity. Once they are cut down, though, they release all the carbon they have stored over a lifetime. Deforestation at the current rate is thought responsible for a tenth of global emissions. Yet studies show that rainforest nations such as Brazil and Indonesia have spent over 100 times more on subsidies for sectors that drive deforestation, palm oil, timber, soy, beef, and biofuels, than they have received in international aid to prevent deforestation. Last year, Norway slashed its forest protection payments to Brazil by more than half in response to a 29% spike in deforestation and the Amazonian country's decision to have its own environmental funds. Andreas Dahl Jorgensen, the deputy director of the Norwegian government's International Climate and Forest Initiative, said the new report revealed an alarming story. These numbers are a call to action for everyone, forest countries, the international community, and private sector, he said. We simply won't meet the climate targets we agreed in Paris without a drastic reduction in deforestation and the restoration of forests around the world. Brazil still leads the world in forest clearances, according to the report, with 11.1 million acres of foliage disappearing last year. But there has been a rapid deterioration in other countries, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Almost 3.7 million acres of forest were lost there in 2017, a 6% increase over 2016 as the population grew and agricultural practices intensified. But the DRC's worst year yet for deforestation is unlikely to mark a turning point. Earlier this year, the DRC government awarded 2 Chinese companies logging concessions across 2,510 square miles of tropical forest. Partly located on the world's largest peatland zones, ranging across territory the size of Iowa, it stores an estimated 30 billion metric tons of carbon. So we have China planting forests in China, but chopping down forests elsewhere. Business as usual for most countries. Tosi Mpanu, DRC's lead climate change negotiator and a government environmental advisor, denied that the new concessions breached a logging moratorium in place since 2002, banning new industrial logging. But he told HuffPost, at the end of the day, let's face it, the moratorium is showing limited results. The problem is not with people that have logging concessions who have to abide by certain rules. The problem is runaway illegal logging. Most tree clearances in the country were caused by subsistence agricultural practices and energy needs, he said. It is about people's survival, not destroying the forest or trying to make a quick buck by exporting crops. If you need to put food on your plate, you will do slash and burn agriculture, he said. If you need energy and don't have efficient cooking stoves or solar panels, you will use charcoal and cut down trees. We need to align poverty alleviation with forest protection because they are two sides of the same coin. Colombia also saw a record year for deforestation in 2017, with 1.2 million acres of forest denuded. A 46% rise on the previous year, and more than double the rate of loss seen in the 2001-2015 period. WRI says ranchers and business groups took advantage of a power vacuum created when the guerrilla movement FARC abandoned its Amazon base as part of a peace deal. If you remember, they were saying that having FARC in place actually protected the forests. They signed a peace deal, and then all, developers and loggers just moved in. An unprecedented hurricane season in the Caribbean destroyed a third of Dominica's forests and a tenth of Puerto Rico's. Brazil was also hit hard by fires, mostly human-caused, and by land clearances as the new right-wing government rolled back environmental protections and law enforcement protocols, adding to political uncertainty. In total, 72.6 million acres of trees were lost last year, a shade below 73.4 million acres recorded by the WRI in 2016. Those numbers are substantially higher than the United States Food and Agriculture Organization numbers, which were at least published in 2015 and come out every 5 years. WRI bases its assessment on satellite-monitored near real-time changes in global tree cover, whether natural forests, parks, or tree plantations. New tree growth is measured separately. The UN FAO, however, uses statistics that are self-reported by governments and exclusively monitors forests that meet a standardized description. That means it would not count recently logged land as forest loss. If official inventory said trees would be allowed to regenerate there in the future. Wow. The main reason why tropical forests are disappearing is not a mystery, Seymour said. Vast areas continue to be cleared for soy, beef, palm oil, and timber. These 4 commodities are responsible for most of the world's tropical deforestation, but beef plays an outsized role in the worst affected countries, causing more than twice as much deforestation as the other 3 commodities combined. In South America, conservation scientists blame cattle farming for 71% of deforestation between 1990 and 2005, compared with other commodity production, including coffee, rubber, cocoa, and sugar, which caused just 17% of the damage. Demand for beef, soy, palm oil, and timber is strong domestically in the world's rich north and increasingly in emerging economies such as India and China. However, the typical American eats 4 times more beef than the global average of 14.6 pounds per year per year, even though it is the most nutritionally and energy inefficient food available. Experts see the appetite of the developed world for agricultural commodities as the key driver of rainforest destruction. Very simply put, whatever rich countries want to buy, they can have because poor countries are willing to supply it. Money, 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 money. A lot of export crops linked to deforestation go to the world's rich markets. Rod Taylor, WRI's Global Forestry Director, told HuffPost, "We see a lot of commitments to the notion of deforestation-free supply chains in the private sector, and we need to keep pressure on companies to turn that into a reality. The European Union already has a timber regulation intended to tackle the 100 billion a year trade in illegal wood products, although EU auditors have found no evidence it is working. Less than a third of tropical timber products sold in Europe in 2016 had been verified as sustainable, according to a report released Tuesday." Excuse me. Lost my place real quick. Okay. If the EU's 7 main timber importing countries, the UK, Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, and Spain, sourced sustainably, more than 12.4 million acres of rainforest could be protected, it said. The EU agreed earlier this month to phase out palm oil products from the continent's biofuels by 2030. By which point, not much will matter. After pressure from the European Parliament for a more immediate ban, Victoria Tauli Corpus, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, said one of the most effective ways, okay, sorry, just had to go back and read that word like several times. One of the most effective ways, because it reads like rapport, and is it reporting, like a raconteur mixed with a reporter? Is that what they're saying? Rapporteur. Anyways, preserving the world's rainforest treasures is to empower forest communities. They have long stewarded and protected the world's forests, which is crucial to fight against climate change, she said. The rate of tree cover loss is less than half on indigenous peoples' lands compared to elsewhere. Where their legal rights to the land are recognized, the rate is even better. While indigenous peoples occupy more than half of the world's land area, they have secure rights in just 10% of them. Last year, many of the 197 environmental defenders killed were indigenous forest guardians. The one glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak data set was a surprising 60% drop in the rate of primary forest loss in Indonesia, partly attributed to peatland drainage moratorium passed in 2016. Putera Parthama, the Indonesian government's climate change director, said the logging ban improved fire management and enhanced law enforcement help make this country the only tropical nation with a declining rate of forest clearances. The lack of an El Nino this year doesn't negate the impact of what we are undertaking, he said. We hope and expect that Indonesia will no longer be associated with deforestation in the region. We hope. And moving on, as time grows thin, somebody sent me this. This is quite old, but just some good information if y'all want to know what the government knows, and possibly what they might be doing and not telling you about. Or planning and not telling you about. Pentagon bracing for public dissent over climate and energy shocks. This is from 2013, June 14th. NSA PRISM is motivated in part by fears that environmentally linked disasters could spur anti-government activism. Top secret U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, documents disclosed by The Guardian, have shocked the world with revelations of a comprehensive US-based surveillance system with direct access to Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and other tech giants. New Zealand court records suggest that data harvested by the NSA's PRISM system has been fed into the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, whose members also include the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. But why have Western security agencies developed such an unprecedented capacity to spy on their own domestic populations? Since the 2008 economic crash, security agencies have increasingly spied on political activists, especially environmental groups, on behalf of corporate interests. This activity is linked to the last decade of US defense planning, which has been increasingly concerned by the risk of civil unrest at home triggered by catastrophic events linked to climate change, energy shocks, or economic crisis, or all three. Just last month, unilateral changes to US military laws formally granted the Pentagon extraordinary powers to intervene in a domestic emergency or civil disturbance. This happened under President Obama. Federal military commanders have the authority in extraordinary emergency circumstances where prior authorization by the president is impossible, and duly constituted local authorities are unable to control the situation to engage temporarily in activities that are necessary to quell large-scale unexpected civil disturbances. Yeah, sounds like some martial law stuff. Other documents show that the extraordinary emergencies the Pentagon is worried about include a range of environmental and related disasters. In 2006, the U.S. National Security Strategy warned that environmental destruction, whether caused by human behavior or cataclysmic mega disasters such as floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, or tsunamis, problems of this scope may overwhelm the capacity of local authorities to respond and may even overtax national militaries, requiring a larger international response. Okay, well, that sounds just like some helpful stuff. 2 years later, the Department of Defense Army Modernization Strategy described the arrival of a new era of persistent conflict due to competition for depleting natural resources in overseas markets, fueling future resource wars over water, food, and energy. The report predicted a resurgence of anti-government and radical ideologies that potentially threaten government stability. Oh, yeah. That's this really wide net right there. And radical ideologies, what does that mean? Well, of course, if you are an extreme conservationist, or if you're extremely concerned about environmental collapse, you might be a radical. In the same year, a report by the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute warned that a series of domestic crises could provoke a large-scale civil unrest. The path to disruptive domestic shock could include traditional threats such as deployment of WMDs alongside catastrophic natural and human disasters, or pervasive public health emergencies coinciding with unforeseen economic collapse. Such crises could lead to a loss of functioning political and legal order, leading to purposeful domestic resistance or insurgency. DoD might be forced by circumstances to put its broad resources at the disposal of civil authorities to contain and reverse violent threats to domestic tranquility. Under the most extreme circumstances, this might include use of military force against hostile groups inside of the United States. Further, DoD would be, by necessity, an essential enabling hub for the continuity of political authority in a multi-state or nationwide civil conflict or disturbance. Continuity of leadership. What is that? That's something that's been in place for quite a while. It's all very interesting. I mean, basically, since President Bush, we have been on an ever increasing fascistic trend. The military and the president having, more and more powers to do, basically whatever they want, for any excuse. And that is, that is ramping up under Trump. I don't find it very coincidental that Trump is the president right now. And that all of these things were increasing under Obama. I mean, Obama was the perfect cover for all of this stuff because he gave a nice, liberal, calm, outward face to the government. Here we are, we love liberal, progressive things, meanwhile, many scary laws were being put into effect. The following year, let me see. That year, what year? That year, the Pentagon had begun developing a 20,000 strong troop force who would be on hand to respond to domestic catastrophes and civil unrest. The program was, reportedly based on a 2005 Homeland Security strategy, which emphasized preparing for multiple simultaneous mass casualty incidents. The following year, a U.S. Army-funded RAND Corporation study, anything funded by the RAND Corporation is something to be extremely alarmed about, called for a U.S. force presence specifically to deal with civil unrest. Such fears were further solidified in a detailed 2010 study by the U.S. Joint Forces Command, designed to inform joint concept development and experimentation throughout the Department of Defense, setting out the U.S. military's definitive vision for future trends and potential global threats. Climate change, the study said, would lead to increased risk of tsunamis, typhoons, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and other natural catastrophes. Furthermore, if such a catastrophe occurs within the United States itself, particularly when the nation's economy is in a fragile state or where U.S. military bases or key civilian infrastructure are broadly affected, the damage to U.S. security could be considerable. So if you don't think the Department of Defense, if you don't think the entire U.S. government doesn't realize the threat of climate change, i.e. if you are a Trump follower or supporter and you believe that climate change is a hoax, the climate change is a hoax theory, you're missing actual information that our government has and has been trying to give to people. You're intentionally misunderstanding the severity of the problem. The year of, let me see, the study also warned of possible shortfall in global oil output by 2015. Wow. A severe energy crunch is inevitable. Without a massive expansion of production and refining capacity, can you say fracking? While it is difficult to predict precisely what economic, political, and strategic effects such a shortfall might produce, it surely would reduce the prospects for growth in both the developing and developed worlds. Such an economic slowdown would exacerbate other unresolved tensions. So this is why we are ramping up our oil production. The year of that year, the DoD's quadrennial defense review seconded such concerns while recognizing that climate change, energy security, and economic stability are inextricably linked. Also in 2010, the Pentagon ran war games to explore the implications of large-scale economic breakdown in the U.S., impacting on food supplies and other essential services, as well as how to maintain domestic order amid civil unrest. Speaking about the group's conclusions at giant U.S. defense contractor Booz Allen Hamilton's conference facility in Virginia, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Effendahl, then chief of the Joint and Army Concepts Division, highlighted homeland operations as a way to legitimize the U.S. military budget. An increased focus on domestic activities might be a way of justifying whatever army force structure the country can still afford. 2 months earlier, Effendahl Elfendahl explained in a DoD roundtable that future planning was needed because technology is changing so rapidly, because there's so much uncertainty in the world, both economically and politically, and because the threats are so adaptive and networked because they live within the populations in many cases. The 2010 exercises were part of the U.S. Army's annual Unified Quest program, which more recently, based on expert input from across the Pentagon, has explored the prospect that ecological disasters and a weak economy, as the recovery won't take root until 2020, will fuel migration. As the recovery won't take root until 2020, will fuel migration to urban areas, ramping up social tensions in the U.S. homeland as well as within and between resource-starved nations. NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden was a computer systems administrator for Booz Allen Hamilton, where he directly handled the NSA's IT systems, including the PRISM surveillance system. According to Booz Allen's 2011 annual report, the corporation has overseen Unified Quest for more than a decade to help military and civilian leaders envision the future. Doesn't that sound very nice? And like a soft pillow. The latest war games, the report reveals, focused on detailed, realistic scenarios with hypothetical roads to crisis, including homeland operations resulting from a high-magnitude natural disaster, among other scenarios in the context of converging global trends which may change the current security landscape and future operating environment. At the end of the two-day event, senior leaders were better prepared to understand new required capabilities and forced design requirements to make homeland operations more effective. All right, guys, I don't know how much more of this I'm going to read, but you get the idea. Maybe I'll just kind of skim through the rest. Department of Homeland Security documents released in April proved that a systematic effort by the agency to surveil and disrupt peaceful demonstrations linked to Occupy Wall Street, according to the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Similarly, FBI documents confirmed a strategic partnership between the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the private sector designed to produce intelligence on behalf of the corporate security community. Corporate security community. A PCJF spokesperson remarked that the documents show federal agencies functioning as a de facto intelligence arm of Wall Street and corporate America. Yeah. In particular, domestic surveillance has systematically targeted peaceful environment activists, including anti-fracking activists across the U.S., such as the Gas Drilling Awareness Coalition, Rising Tide North America, the People's Oil and Gas Collaborative, and Greenpeace. Similar trends are at play in the UK, where the case of undercover policeman Mark Kennedy revealed the extent of the state's involvement in monitoring the Environment Direct Action movement. A University of Bath study citing the Kennedy case and based on confidential sources found that a whole range of corporations, such as McDonald's, Nestle, and the oil major Shell, use covert methods to gather intelligence on activist groups, counter criticism of their strategies and practices, and evade accountability. Yep. That's all I'm going to read of this. I'm going to link this in the description box if you would like to read the whole thing. I read most of it. I just missed kind of the end here. But yes, if you don't think that corporations are the enemy or are controlling our entire political system, again, you're missing a lot of information. They own the entire bulk of mainstream media, and that is why people believe the things that they believe. And it's not going to get any better. Although I did see a tweet today. Maybe I can find this tweet and link it in the description box. But so there's a graph or a poll about different segments of the population that believe that the mainstream media is truthful. And like 90 in the 90 percentile of GOP people who identified as Republicans, they don't believe mainstream media. In the 70 percentile of independent voters, they don't believe the mainstream media is truthful. Democrats are in the 50 percentile of believing that the mainstream media is truthful. So, apparently it's Democrats, liberals who believe that the mainstream media is telling them the truth. And that's an interesting poll, given the fact that, given the fact that the people that were lied to probably the most during the last election cycle were Democrats. But, try to tell that to a good Democrat or, a good, a good Hillary foot soldier, and they'll, tell you you don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, I digress. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. I hope to be back tomorrow with another video. I'm going to interview Dean Walker tomorrow, or be interviewed by. I don't know what we're doing. We're having a talk. I believe I'm interviewing him. And hopefully I will get that uploaded tomorrow, and you all can check that out. Until next time, peace.